Well, today's lesson is about strategies for a comprehension test. It's quite simple, but before we come to that, let's review the previous 8 lessons. So the story so far goes like this. Lesson 1 was reminding you that comprehension is understanding and that there are no shortcuts to understanding. Telepathy is but a pipe dream. This means that you cannot read the author's mind directly. So you have to use clues. Read the author, not just their words. The words on the page by which the author communicates with you are only clues. You have to put them together with other clues, but most of all with your learning, your education, so that you can piece together what the author was thinking or was trying to communicate. Lesson 4, that making sense of text isn't like fitting Lego bricks together. You can't treat words and phrases like Lego bricks, which always mean the same thing. Language is too sophisticated for that. So understanding requires you to take a reasonable interpretation considering the context. So the context is all important. Lesson 5, take a sensible interpretation. So it's not the right answer. It's about taking a sensible interpretation given all the clues and your education. So when you read, you're building a picture in your mind's eye. And what you do is keep checking and reviewing that picture in your mind's eye against the clues that you're gathering, and make sure that the picture that you're building is consistent with all the clues. Lesson 6, ask questions as you read. This means reading actively. You're reading in order to make sense of it. Lesson 7 was that comprehension can be partly close. Close means there are things missing. So the author will not describe every aspect of every scenario in great detail. That would be very tedious. So you have to fill in the blanks about what's going on, what the scenario is exactly. And that requires a lot of education on your part, a lot of knowledge, a lot of understanding of the world, and of course the scenario. And lesson 8 was how to read better and faster. Advanced reading is what you need in N11 process, and that's what you should be practicing every day. It's not done in individual words for the most part, although sometimes you do need to scrutinize a word because it's a new word to you. Mostly reading is done in phrases, not just one word at a time, sometimes even whole clauses or sentences if they're short ones. And if you read out loud, then you can only read one word at a time. It makes it harder to understand and it slows you right down. So most of your reading should not be done out loud, nor should you say the words as you read them in your head, because that has a similar effect to reading out loud. So on to today's theme, which is about a comprehension test. So start with this question. What is the point of a comprehension test, or what is its purpose?
I think a comprehension test is like a test that tests you on the knowledge of your knowledge of reading and how well you like understand what you're reading.
Thank you very much. That was quite a comprehensive answer, so I won't actually need any more because our contributor has really got the gist of it. The clue's in the name, isn't it? It's a comprehension test. So it's a test of comprehension. And by now you should be quite aware that that is not a simple thing. Comprehension is not a simple thing. It's highly complex. So here I've put it into a paragraph, a short paragraph, a couple of sentences. The purpose of a comprehension test is to try to gauge or measure or get an idea how good you are at it, to gauge how well you have developed the concepts, knowledge, and skill, for which I have a mnemonic CAKES. C for concepts, K for knowledge, and S for skills, CAKES. So It's to gauge how well you have developed the cakes needed in order to interpret written English sensibly. And what a set of cakes that is. What a powerful life skill that is for you. This includes the text, so the piece of writing, which is normally an excerpt from a bigger piece of writing. It includes the questions, because they too are English and you need to understand the questions. And of course, if it's a multiple choice test, you're given options, usually 4 or 5, but there's no fixed number of options. Because you see, the text is in English, the questions are in English, and the options are in English. If you understood the text very well, but did not understand the questions, you're stuck. If you understood the questions, but you didn't understand the options, you're stuck. So actually, you need to understand all of that. And all of it, it requires the same skills, the same knowledge, the same concepts. So just keep that in mind. It's not just understanding the piece of text. It's also understanding the questions and understanding the options. And sometimes the difference between two options is quite subtle. And you have to look quite closely at two options to see, well, what's the difference between them? And therefore, which one is the better answer? All of this is comprehension. So this is the purpose. If you do take a sensible interpretation of the text, you can give reasonable answers to the questions. Otherwise, you will be guessing. Guessing requires no concepts, no knowledge, no skills. In other words, any fool can guess. You don't need to be educated in order to guess, but you do need to be very well educated in order to take a sensible interpretation. So if you want to excel, and I am assuming that you all do, and that's why you're here. So if you want to excel in comprehension tests, develop the necessary cakes. Remember, concepts, knowledge, and skills. So the cakes, concept, knowledge, and skills you need in order to be good at taking a sensible interpretation. And it's not just English. I'm not going to review all the skills, but refer to the previous 8 lessons for how to do this. Okay, now let's come on to the test situation. In a test situation, typically you're given some text, and it can vary depending on the particular paper. You could have just a paragraph of text followed by a couple of questions. It might be multiple choice, or it might not. Or it could be several pages of text followed by 20 questions. There are a couple of strategies I will mention here. The first strategy is where you read the text first. So strategies, text first. So here, what you do is you read through the entire text. So first, quickly read the whole text in order to get a sense of the flow or shape of the content. Remember to notice the title, the author, and any pictures or peripheral clues. So peripheral clues are things other than the text itself. So that could be the date when it was written, for example. Or that piece may have a title, but it may also give you the title of the book that this piece comes from. All of these are clues that help to give you a little context, and therefore to take a sensible interpretation. So it's not just the text, it's all the other clues. So remember to notice those things. A few don'ts. Don't reread parts of the text. It's very tempting, but don't do it. I'll come back to say why. Don't try to memorize it. Again, I'll come back why. And don't worry about the parts you didn't understand. Just get an overview. This initial read-through should take less than half the time allowance. So if a comprehension section in an 11+ test has a 15-minute time allowance, the reading of the text should take probably about 5 or 6 minutes, no more than that. So it's significantly less than half the time. That leaves you plenty of time to read the questions, search for the answers. Now let me come back to why I said don't reread parts. Sometimes if you've lost focus for a moment, you may not have taken in what a particular sentence is saying. Or it may have been worded in a way that just confused you and you didn't understand. But don't reread it, because it will take time. If you are in the habit of reading and rereading bits of the text, it slows down your reading. And slowing down your reading actually handicaps your comprehension. Reading faster is better for comprehension. Don't try to memorize it. It goes back a little bit to also don't try to reread it. When you read the text through the first time, you don't know which bits are important. So there's no point memorizing parts of the text because you're not sure what you should try to remember. Just try to follow the overview. So you don't need to try and understand every word of it when you read it through the first time. You only need to get the big picture, the overview, the outline. Don't worry about the parts you didn't understand. The reason I'm saying don't do that during your initial read-through is because in the next step, you're going to come back and reread any parts that you need to reread. Don't reread now, because you might be rereading things you don't need to. Just get an overview. Just know roughly what kind of content there is. If it's a story, roughly the storyline. You know, in the early part of the story, what happened? What happened in the first couple of paragraphs? What happened towards the end? What happened towards the middle? If you just get a sense of that, that is enough. So the first read through should be quick, no rereading, no worrying about bits you didn't understand. I don't think it makes sense to underline or circle things either. For the same reason, it doesn't make sense to try to memorize things on the initial read, because you don't know which bits are going to be important or relevant. So it's quick. And if you're slow with the initial read, it's probably because you're going about it wrong. Look at my don'ts here. See if you're guilty of doing those things which I'm saying don't do. Read it through quickly the first time. Just get the overview. Don't try to understand everything, every word, every phrase, every sentence, even every paragraph. Just get the big picture. That is enough for you to do the next thing, which is then immediately after you've read through the whole text, turn to the questions. Start reading and answering the questions. If you don't need to read through, if there are 15 questions, don't read all 15 questions before you start answering. If you read question 1 and you know the answer, answer it. Why would you not do that? Normally, in a test, there is a time limit, and your aim is to give as many correct answers as you can within your time limit. So don't waste time. If you know the answer, write it down immediately. When you read a question, you might know the answer without having to reread the text. So put it, read the next question. If you think, oh, I don't know that one, I'm going to have to go back. That's going to be a tricky one. It's going to be time consuming. Skip it or guess an answer. I personally would guess an answer randomly, or one that I think probably makes sense, because I got the gist of the paragraph. You see, I got the gist of the text. I got the overview, so I can give an answer which seems to make sense, but do it quickly. And then also circle the question number so you know that was just a guess, and read on. And some of the questions will be what I call technical questions, to do with parts of speech, figures of speech, synonyms, antonyms, the meanings of words and such things. And those things you may also think, oh, well, yes, I remember reading that word and it meant this, or I know this word very well, and this is a good synonym for it. So you may be able to answer some questions without even looking again at the text. If you can easily answer them and you know you're right, then you can put an answer. But there's a precaution which I'll come back to later on. So you've read the whole text through quickly just the once. to get the overview of it. Then you start reading the question and immediately answering any that you can easily answer. And then anywhere you think, oh yeah, there was something about that in the first couple of paragraphs, then that's the time you go and reread that first couple of paragraphs, seeking the answer to the question. So at that point, you are reading very actively because you have a question in your mind that you are attempting to answer. Plus, you've had a look at the options for the answers. If it's a multiple choice test, when you read the question, also look at the options. And then when you reread the text, you can see which option actually makes the most sense. Okay, and then you come back and you say, oh, right, okay, it's definitely this one because the text says this. And that's how you work through the questions. So you're flicking back and forth between the questions and the text just to double check, to try and understand the part of the text that you need to understand in order to select the most suitable answer. Okay, so we start reading and answering the questions, rereading parts of the text as necessary. See, having read the text, the questions and the options can make better sense. But very importantly, this is a mistake many children make. Don't get hung up on difficult questions. Come back to them. I would say guess an answer first, just in case you run out of time. At least you've put an answer, which is better than leaving a blank. But guess an answer and get through all the questions you can answer reasonably quickly and easily, and then come back to the tricky ones that you guessed in the first place. Because you want to minimize your guesses, but you want to maximize the correct answers that you put. And as I mentioned, you'd be flicking frequently between the text and the questions. There is no limit to that, and it's a good thing to do. Flick back and forth, keep checking, keep double checking, keep rereading bits of the text that you need to reread. You're only rereading the bits you need. There are some questions which are particularly tricky, and you need to pretty much understand the text quite fully in order to answer them. Questions about what point do you think the author is trying to make? You know, big picture type questions. Then you need to also understand, get into the author's mind more. Okay, so this is the first strategy, text first, read the text first. But of course, it's not the only strategy. There are many others. So let's go to the next strategy. The next strategy is read the questions first. And some people have tried this. So this is what they do. First, quickly read all the questions. So if there are 15 questions, read 15 questions. Then they go to the text and start looking for the answers to the questions. Now that can work sometimes, but I don't recommend this method most of the time. This can be, if you're very short of time, a way to get a few marks if you don't have the time to do it properly. So I would say it is very much a desperate measure rather than the strategy of choice. When you do seek the answers in the text, of course, you're reading actively because you've got a particular question in your head. One of the disadvantages of doing it like this is that you are only seeking an answer to a particular question rather than understanding the text, and that's going to handicap you with the majority of questions. Also, when you do read the questions, you've got no context because you don't know what the text was about. You have no overview of the text. So you might very easily misinterpret or misunderstand the question. Okay, so this is not my recommendation, but it is a possibility. And of course, you must flick frequently again between the text and the questions. This strategy is okay for simple extraction of facts, like what color is this person's hair, or how many cars were parked along that road. Simple facts like that. But you know that most of the questions in a comprehension aren't going to be simple extraction of a fact from the text. So this read the question first and look for the answer is good only for a very narrow range of questions, but it is inadequate for questions that require appreciation of the text. Now, of course, there are other strategies. Some people say, well, what if I read the first paragraph and then try and answer questions? I don't think that's really going to help you much. Or if I read the first few questions and then look for the answers for those, and then come back and read some more questions. Don't try to do it piecemeal like that. I would say that the two main strategies are either read the whole text first, then start answering questions, or read all the questions first, then start answering them by reading the text. But one is very definitely better than the other, which is, of course, reading the text first. Reading the text first is very definitely better because it gives you the understanding of the scenario and the overview. And it, of course, allows you to make sense of the questions and the options. Okay, now some questions are about parts of speech, literary techniques like similes and alliteration, rhyming, various literary techniques, or about synonyms or antonyms of some of the words used in the passage, or the meanings of words and phrases. Sometimes they'll say, what does this phrase on line 27 mean? And then they'll give you some options. So those questions, which I call them technical questions, and sometimes about punctuation or punctuation marks, they could be attempted without reference to the text. They could be attempted without reference to the text. But the operative word there is could. I don't recommend that. It's, again, a desperate measure. If you are short of time and you say, okay, I can answer this question without having to read the text, you would try and get the mark. But you must be cautious when you do this. But be cautious about doing this because even such things, i.e. as technical things, can be context dependent. Meaning that the way that the word is used here might not be what you had in your head. You need to see how that phrase is being used in line 27 before you decide you know what it means. Because as you know very well, in English, many words and many phrases have multiple interpretations, multiple usages. And you need to be in the scenario in order to take a sensible interpretation. And that's why I say be cautious about answering questions, even technical questions, without reference to the context. It would be prudent to check usage in the particular context. For example, see the words text and the word appreciation. Okay, now I've used these words, the words text and the word appreciation, in the previous slide. Now, before I show you that slide again, I wonder if anybody can give me a meaning of the word appreciation, or your understanding of the word appreciation.
I think appreciation means when you kind of admire and think and like about the work.
I didn't understand the last bit, but I think you got the gist of it with the first thing that you mentioned, which was to do with admiring something. That if you appreciate, or if you show appreciation, it's recognition of the good qualities of something. You're showing appreciation. So it may be appreciation of a person, that you're admiring something good that they have done. You're acknowledging it, you're recognizing it. That is appreciation. Okay, that's one meaning of appreciation. What's a different meaning of appreciation? Different, remember, I don't want the same meaning in different words. I want a different meaning.
Appreciation is also means for being thankful of what you got.
Thank you. So appreciation is that you are not taking something for granted, that you are appreciated, you show appreciation, thankfulness, acknowledgement So there's a certain overlap with the first meaning, but there is also a slight difference. Now, this is one of the beauties of language, that it, as I said weeks back, it is not like putting Lego bricks together. And the meaning of a word is not set in concrete and limited very narrowly. Most words have kind of shades of meaning depending on how you use them, the context, what phrases they're couched inside. Okay, but I've got a couple of other meanings of appreciation in my head, and I wonder if anybody here can tell us another meaning of appreciation.
I think that it might mean a full understanding of a situation.
Okay, that's good. So appreciation of the text means having a full understanding of the text. So when you appreciate something, it doesn't only mean that you did not take it for granted and you are grateful for it and you show recognition for some good quality. That's one meaning. But to appreciate something can also mean to actually have a full understanding. When you first said this, I didn't quite appreciate your meaning. Do you see? I didn't quite take a full understanding of your meaning. I didn't fully appreciate the facts when I made this decision. Do you see? So to appreciate can also mean to understand. So it's a synonym of comprehend, or appreciation can be a synonym of comprehension or understanding. So appreciation, do you see? Okay, but it has yet another completely different meaning.
To increase in value.
Thank you. So appreciation, remember it's a noun. The meaning we just heard was a verb meaning. So be acutely aware about parts of speech, because that's part of your mastery of the language. But you got the gist of it. It's just that you gave the wrong part of speech. Appreciation is a noun. So appreciation means an increase. So there's been an appreciation, normally an increase in price, as our speaker said. So there's been an appreciation in the value of secondhand cars. It's actually recently, I remember a few months back, secondhand vans. There was a shortage of vans during COVID and lockdowns because everybody was having lots of things delivered to their home rather than going out shopping. So delivery means delivery vans, and everybody wanted vans. So there was an appreciation in the value of second-hand vans. So appreciation can also mean an increase in the price or the value of something. If you buy gold, lots of people buy gold as an investment and keep it for 20 years, its value will appreciate substantially. So do you see what I'm telling you? You look at the word appreciation and maybe only one meaning comes to your mind. And then you go and quickly pick the answer. Oh yes, I know what appreciation means. It's answer B. And you could be dead wrong because you didn't look at the context to see which meaning of several meanings of appreciation was being used in this context. So context dependent, the usage, you have to look at the usage. This is also one of the reasons why learning words from a list of words is actually not a good idea, because the meaning and usage of the word depends on the context. And you will hopefully notice when you do your masses of reading that you come across the same word being used in a slightly different way. So let's now come to the slide again and look at where I did use the word. So this is what it said. You see, I've highlighted them, the words in green. I said this strategy, so the questions first strategy, is okay for simple extraction of facts, but is inadequate for questions that require appreciation of the text. So which meaning of appreciation did I use in this sentence? So in this context, what was the appropriate meaning of appreciation?
It means to have a good understanding of the text.
Beautiful, thank you. Exactly. So here it wasn't anything to do with gratitude, not taking for granted, showing appreciation, recognition, acknowledgement. It wasn't that meaning at all, nor was it an increase in value or price. Here, it was very much the full understanding of what you're reading. Now, the word text itself can also be referring to different things. What's one thing that I have used the word text to refer to? Let's say on this slide itself, in bullet point 2. What am I referring to as the text in bullet point 2?
You are referring to the text which you are supposed to read.
Thank you. Okay, so remember this, I am referring to the passage, right? The excerpt, normally an excerpt from a book. I mean, of course, sometimes it's a poem, an entire poem, but it isn't normally an entire short story because there isn't enough space to read an entire short story in a test. But what other text is there? What other text could I have referred to with that word text?
Like a text message when you message someone, it's like a text.
You are right. And you've preempted something I was coming to, but that's very useful. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to point out that the questions themselves are also text. And the options that you choose from in a multiple choice test are also text. Do you see? And that is also text that you need to take a reasonable interpretation of. So the word text could be referring to the passage or the question or the options. All of those are text. And as our last contributor just mentioned, a text is normally a short for a text message that you'd send on a mobile phone. But text can also be used as a verb. So what would it mean if you use the word text as a verb?
So basically you're typing.
Right, exactly. If we're using the word text as a verb, it means to text. It's the action of sending a text message or composing a text message. Okay, so to compose and send a text message, we call it texting, to text. Do you see? So even the word text can be referring to different things, and it can be used as a noun and it can be used as a verb. So this is why I say to you, be very careful about thinking you know the answer without checking against the text, because it is the text that gives you context, situation, and the meanings of words and phrases can vary according to the context, as I've shown you. Here's a summary. The point of a comprehension test is to see how well you have developed the cakes. Remember, concepts, knowledge, and skills. Develop the cakes required to take a sensible interpretation of text. So developing those cakes is how to excel in it. The soundest strategy. Soundest? What's it got to do with sound? Hands up. What do I mean, the soundest strategy?
I think soundest means the best.
Okay, you're right. So if something is sound, it means it makes sense. It's logical. Everything fits together. So if you make a plan and your plan is sound, it means that it's logical, it makes sense, it's been well thought through, it's sound, it'll work, or probably work. Okay, so sound. And of course, the est form of it, we call it the superlative form, not superlative, as some of you say, superlative. So it means the most sound, the best, as our contributor said. So the soundest strategy in a comprehension test is to first quickly read the whole text to get an overview of it, then read the questions, then flick back and forth, rereading as necessary. Now, I know what sometimes happens is you look at the text and you think, oh, this is too much text, because it might be 2 or even 3 pages of text. And you think, oh, this is going to take me ages to read. But it doesn't. It doesn't take ages to read. You should be using advanced reading techniques. And you will have developed advanced reading techniques if you've been doing lots of varied personal reading every day. you will have been reading all kinds of material, fiction and non-fiction, all kinds of styles of English, and you will be taking in, without even trying, several words at a time, i.e. phrases or clauses. And sometimes you need to pause on an individual word, but for the most part, you don't do that. And if you follow the guidance I have given today about don't reread parts, don't worry about things that you didn't understand, don't try to memorize, don't annotate, i.e. circle, underline, as you read. Just read it through from beginning to end. Just keep moving along the lines, and you can use your pencil point or your finger as a guide so that you do keep moving along the line and then keep going down to the next line, so to stop yourself from rereading. Now, if you're prone to rereading, you'll know it. What do I mean prone? I'm using the word prone. I said if you're prone to rereading, and then I'm going to make a recommendation of something you can do. So what do I mean if you are prone to rereading?
You're most likely to reread the text.
Correct. Very good. So if you're prone to something, it means you have a tendency to do that thing. That's what it means if you're prone to something. But the word prone itself has another completely different meaning. If you're lying prone, what does that mean? Did anybody happen to know? I mean, this is just incidental because I happen to use the word prone.
I think that it means lying flat, especially like face downwards.
Exactly right. Yes, I was waiting for the face down. So if you're lying prone, you're not lying on your back, you're lying face down. Okay, so lying prone. So that's a completely different meaning of prone. If you're prone to something, it means that you're vulnerable to it, or you have a tendency to do that thing. So I'm going to finish what I was saying. If you are prone to rereading, then what you can do in order to help yourself to overcome that tendency is that when you read your daily reading, use your finger or a pencil to guide your eyes and keep moving. Don't stop and don't go back. Sometimes you'll want to stop and you might want to go back, but resist that temptation because you're trying to break that habit, and it is a habit. And when you develop a habit which is holding you back, you have to try and overcome it by developing a better habit. And this better habit is just to keep going through the text and say, okay, I didn't quite get that. And you know what happens is you just become better at understanding what you read. And when you read faster, that makes it easier anyway to understand what you read. And what you often find is that when you read the next sentence or the next paragraph, the bit that you didn't understand the first time, you think, oh yeah, it makes sense now. Okay, so practice continuing to read, keep going through, keep moving along the line, keep moving to the next line, just keep going. So at first your mind will be occupied with what your finger is doing or what your pencil is doing. But after a short time, you will find that you are able to just keep moving through and not worry about the bit that you didn't quite understand. Okay, and that's a better training for you. So that is it. This is the strategy that I recommend. Read the text first. It doesn't take as long as you might think it's going to take. If it does take you long to read the text and you're using up half the time or more than half the time for the text, it's not because there's too much text, but because you're reading it in the wrong way. Maybe you're rereading parts of it. Maybe you're reading it one word at a time. Maybe your mind is actually somewhere else rather than in this task. So that is my guidance to you about strategies in a comprehension test. It's really very straightforward. That isn't the challenge. See, that's a very simple thing. Read the text first, then start answering questions, flick back and forth. That's it. But of course, the guidance, the advice that I have given you today doesn't get you many marks unless you've done the groundwork, unless you've educated yourself, unless you've developed the concepts, the knowledge the skills, language, knowledge of the world, general knowledge, understanding of how the world works. What would a reasonable person do in this situation? Does something strike you as a bit odd? This is all part of your education. So yes, comprehension is highly complex. That's why it's challenging, but it's also why it can be highly satisfying and fun. Comprehending well requires you to be intelligent as well as very well educated and knowledgeable about the world and English. Don't allow yourself to be dumbed down by following simplistic tips, tricks, methods, and techniques. Those people who advocate tips and tricks for comprehension are undermining your education. So develop your intellect and your command of English and educate yourself as well as you can. There is no substitute for the devouring and enjoyment of large amounts of varied daily personal reading. This is the real key. This is how you do comprehension well. What I've just shown you is how to make best use of the time if you're in a timed situation. But unless you've done this, unless you've developed the case, it doesn't matter what your strategy is, you just don't know enough.
In school, we have this thing called a quiz. So we first have to read the books, then we go and then in the next day in school, we have an iPad and we go and do a quiz on it. Should I first put in a chapter, quickly read it, like you said in a comprehension test, or should I read it so I understand it fully?
It depends whether there's a time limit. Do you have a time limit on answering the questions?
No.
Okay, if there's no time limit, then personally, I would take the trouble to fully understand the text. The method or the strategy that I recommended during this lesson was what you would use in a comprehension test. This is in an 11+ situation where there is always a time limit. And that's the reason why I said, don't worry about what bits you didn't understand and don't go and reread, because it will take up time unnecessarily. Okay, so if you're in a situation where there is no time limit, then sure, try to understand the text more fully, appreciate it fully. But when you're in a timed situation, read the way that I explained during the lesson. Okay, thank you for asking that.
What books do you recommend?
Okay, so reading books we're talking about here. I first of all don't recommend books, and I don't name books normally. The best kind of reading is unique to you. You choose the books to read, but as long as you vary it, meaning you're not always reading the same author. You're not always reading the same genre. You're not always reading fiction, or you're not always reading non-fiction. Vary it. Your reading should be as unique as you are. You should choose the books. So I will mention not particular books, but a good mix. So your reading should include some fiction and some non-fiction daily. You know, I personally, if I were you, I would read from at least 3 different books or sources every day. I normally read from 3, sometimes 4 different books every day. And in the fiction, vary the genre. You know, there's crime, there's adventure, there's fantasy, lots of different genres. Vary it. So vary the author, vary the genre, but also mix in some modern literature and some classic literature. If I were you, I'd read all the classics, you know, all the famous old books. The moment I name a book, everybody says, oh, Sir Taylor said, read this book. So everybody goes and reads that book. That's why I don't mention books, because you should be choosing books. But I would read all the classics that you've heard of, children's classics, and read all of them. they're all interesting, and it's sort of part of your general education too, because they're used as cultural references. So read all the classics, all the famous children's books, and then from the modern literature, just pick things that you like and vary them a lot. So that's on the fiction side. On the non-fiction side, I find, again, read a variety. An encyclopedia is a fantastic resource because you can read about so many different things and gain lots of knowledge. But also read news articles, magazines, about hobbies that you have, things that interest you. Okay, so vary your fiction, vary your non-fiction in the way that I have just described. And the reason why I didn't give you a list of books to read is because you should choose your reading. It should be unique to you. Thank you for that question.
What should I do daily to practice my comprehension?
Okay, thank you. I think what you really need to do is not so much practice a comprehension test, which might be or might not be what you meant. What you do daily is read a great variety, the kind that I just described, because that helps you to develop the cakes, the concepts, the knowledge, and the skills that you need in order to be better at comprehension. And the more you read and the greater the variety you read, the better educated you are, the greater extent to which you develop the cakes that are being tested. Every time you read, when you're understanding what you read, you are practicing comprehension. So the simple answer to your question is tons of varied reading. Thank you for the opportunity to point that out.
What happens if you're on a test and you don't have that much time and you have lots of questions left in a comprehension test in an exam? Then what do you do?
Well, the situation is that you were given, let's say, 15 minutes. You've got maybe a couple of pages of text and let's say 15 questions, and you've got to question, let's say, question 6, and then they say 5 minutes left, or no, actually, that's not a bad position to be in if you've got 5 minutes still and you've only got another 9 questions to answer. That's not too bad. But if they say, okay, you're on question 6, and they say 1 minute remaining. Okay, now, if 1 minute is remaining and you've still got 9 questions, you are not going to be able to find the answers to 9 questions in 1 minute. Then what I would do is because in answering the first 6 questions, I clearly spent a lot of time reading the text, because otherwise I would not find myself in the position that you've just described. If you end up in a position where you've taken long for the first half of the questions, you will probably have spent a good bit of while reading and rereading parts of the text, and therefore have a pretty good understanding of the text. And because of that, it's worth your while to go through guessing answers, but with some of them, you will know the answers because you've taken so long on reading and rereading the text. So you have no option but to guess. So this is the desperate situation that you don't want to be in. Whenever you don't have enough time in a test, this is the answer. You have no option but to guess. And don't make a random guess. Look at the options. And because you have understood some parts of the text, even if you did not understand all parts of the text, you'll be able to eliminate some of the options as obviously irrelevant or wrong. And then you can choose from the questions or the options that you didn't eliminate. And it doesn't take long. Again, what you're doing is you're using your advanced reading. So the reading itself is not time consuming. So you do have time to read the question and have a glance at the options and choose the most sensible option. So they're not random guesses. They're intelligent guesses because you know the text. So you use that knowledge and get it. But at that point, if you've got a minute left for, say, 9 questions, you don't have time to be flicking back and forth and checking against the text. You have to go by what you've taken in of the text. And you're going to have to end up guessing a few. So that is the situation you want to avoid being in by doing all the things I've been telling you to do. Lots of daily reading, develop advanced reading techniques, practice reading so that you're not rereading. And if you're doing these things that I'm recommending to you and you are educating yourself, then you won't find yourself in that situation of having to guess lots. Okay? If you are in that situation, you've got it wrong and you're going to end up guessing. There's no way around it. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Have a lovely evening and see you all soon. Take care.